Guys, so in this video, I'm going to be doing a little hypothetical. What if the United States decided they wanted a territorial expansion and decided to head north and invade Canada? Obviously, this is completely hypothetical. I am not saying this is going to happen because it is not, but it is an interesting thing to think about considering the United States and Canada share the same border. Now, it's a lot more peaceful at that border than it is the US-Mexico border, but either way, I'm just going to give my initial analysis on what would happen if the United States did launch a widespread land invasion, where the invasion would be focused on, and could the United States fully control Canada, possibly with a lot of the Canadian citizens resisting heavily when it comes to invading other countries. The biggest battle outside of taking over the country is keeping the country and really manipulating the citizens into believing that you want to be part of America, you want to be part of us. That's the whole idea of annexing another country. It's one thing to invade another country and occupy it. It's another thing to annex it, kind of like what Germany did to Austria, where the Austrian citizens want to be part of the German Empire. But either way, we're just going to go through. I mean, obviously, we all understand that this is a complete mismatch between the United States and Canada, just on paper. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean this war would be over within a day. But if you look at the Canadian population density, they're all bunched up south because of how cold Canada is in the north. Now, technically, Canadians can argue that if America were to do something like this, this would be an invasion heavily involving the Great Lakes. Crossing over to Toronto, you would also have a ton of troops assembled up in Vermont, New Hampshire, those type of areas, ready to go into Montreal and Quebec. Canada would be able to realize this and kind of relocate some of their troops, but overall, I do think the United States would very quickly defeat Canada. The big argument becomes, and this is an argument that I've seen play out a lot in terms of hypothetical scenarios between Canadians and Americans, in terms of NATO. Now, you might be saying, well, look at Russia, Ukraine. Nobody thought that Ukraine could fend off Russia, and I'll agree, it is a little bit surprising, but we do have to understand that the Ukrainians have more advanced military technology than Russia. And you might be wondering, how is that possible? Well, it's possible because of NATO and the United States and all of the Western European countries coming together to help Ukraine against Russia and fend them off. Would that happen in this war? I would say absolutely not. NATO, if you look at the idea of NATO and why it was formed, it makes perfect sense. You want to stop World War III, you have a bunch of the most powerful countries come together, band together, and form a military pact against it. But where NATO originally was after World War II in terms of countries, military strength versus where it is now, it's a completely different place. Basically, what I'm saying is the United States has tenfold increased their military capacity while a lot of these other countries just haven't done it. So NATO is mainly based on the United States. If the United States left NATO, NATO would lose not all of its value because it basically become like a European type pact, but it would lose a ton of value. So no, I don't think that the United Kingdom and those other European countries would come to Canada's defense against the United States. The United States is so big, they would be too scared to go to a potential war with the US. And also just in general, based on where North America is located in comparison to Europe, you're talking about crossing the Atlantic Ocean. That's no easy feat. It's very hard to relocate troops and do something like that if America was to invade Canada. I do not think NATO would risk ruining their relationship with the United States to try and save Canada. So I do think the United States would take over Canada. I don't know how long it would last. 5 years ago, I would say it would take a day. But now, you don't want to underestimate some of these militaries. And another thing that's important to point out, this would likely take a long I don't want to say rearmament process, but really a long process for American militaries to learn tactics in terms of land invasions. When it comes to the U.S. Marines, I don't think they're taught land invasions, things like this, just because we live in such a different world where it really doesn't happen. That's why it was so shocking when Russia invaded Ukraine. We think the next war is going to be nuclear, which is obviously a scary thought. And that's why so many people, and this is the point, all-out war can never be an answer in modern world. All-out war will destroy our ozone. Basically what I'm saying is we'll have so many nuclear bombs, the ozone will be damaged, and Earth will become just a giant haze ball for basically eternity. It's just not possible. The technology is too strong. And if you're talking about a World War II situation, I think with this current technology, I think the world would have been nuked. If Nazi Germany had nuclear bombs, if the United States had nuclear bombs to the capacity that we have today, that's why it's so scary when you look back on World War II. But just talking about US and Canada, I do think the United States would defeat Canada very quickly, possibly within a week. The question is, can they hold it? Well, when you look at where the Canadians are located, they're all right up against the border in the major cities. So an occupation of Canada would really also have to entail manipulating the citizens of Canada to want to become Americans. Would Canadians fight back against the US military? Those are all things you have to take into account. You cannot compare this to the Middle East. People will say, well, the United States couldn't even defeat Middle Eastern countries. How would they defeat Canada? This is a landlocked country, meaning an invasion does not take something crazy where you have to be, relocate all of your troops to another country just to invade. You're just pushing north. That's all you're doing into Canada. So this would be a lot easier in terms of an invasion because it's a landlocked country. You're invading Canada, and you can also use Alaska, and that would probably be an even easier invasion from the north to collapse down onto Canada. But of course, if you position a bunch of troops up there, Canada would see it coming, and I'm sure they would immediately demand for some help and reinforcements from NATO, and I don't think NATO would care. I do not think NATO would help Canada. They would severely damage their relationship with the United States. And you could say, well, but the United States broke NATO anyways by invading Canada. Yeah, the United States can play by different rules. They're so much more powerful than everyone else in NATO. It really doesn't matter. That's the point of it. That's why NATO is kind of in a weird spot right now where the U.S. is just propping up the pact, and really it's a European pact if the United States were to leave NATO, with most of the powerful countries coming from there. But either way, if the United States invades Canada, I do think they would take it over within a week. But the Canadians, the citizens, would fight. It would be really, I would say, very hard to hold. There is some infighting within Canada, although I think a lot of that is just politics, Another question to ask when it comes to Canada, let's say they start voting in U.S. elections with, the provinces, and they all get electoral votes. I don't think we would have a single Republican president after that because Canada is majority liberal. And if the United States, at this point, I would say the United States is about 50-50, give or take. You could argue it's a little bit more liberal, but in general, it's very close. Canada, on the other hand, it's about 60-40 liberal conservative, so that would really flip elections if the United States did invade and annex Canada. Annex is kind of a weird word, though, because I do think when you annex a country, the country has to agree to it, and the citizens have to agree to it, and I'm sure Canada would not agree to it. It would be a forced occupation of Canada. Now, the reason this is so unrealistic is because Canada is not dumb. They are not trying to make enemies with the United States. The United States, they are not a crazy, unhinged regime. They don't just go out and invade places. We've seen that. You can criticize the United States government for doing certain things, but they're not going out and invading other countries. So they have a very nice relationship, and then people say, well, what if the United States needs natural resources? It's a desperation World War III situation. I'm sure Canada, because they're in a bigger military pact, NATO, would be perfectly fine with giving the United States resources if they know what's good for them, and, they do have a very good relationship with the U.S. So that's why an invasion really doesn't make any sense outside of the United States becoming this power-hungry country that's trying to take over North America. And there also are natural resources that we trade with Canada that we would, if we do take over, would get for free. But either way, that's just my opinion on the United States and a potential invasion of Canada here in 2024, 2025. If the United States were not so nice, the ideal thing to do would be to invade Canada, take it over and then set up a puppet government, but obviously that would not be a good thing to do. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.